trail and ultra runners, what is going on? What's happening? Welcome to another episode of the Koopcast. As always, I am your humble host, Coach Jason Koop, and this episode of the podcast might be a little bit of a gut punch for you, the listeners out there, and that is because it is all about failure and how we can process failure and how we can move forward with it. The genesis of this podcast is all based around interactions that I have had with you out there in the community. You guys have contacted me through my website and on social media. And over the course of the last several weeks, very specifically, I have had this question pop up time and time again. And that is, how do I deal with a failure of a season? Well, unbeknownst to me, one of our CTS coaches, Neal, who is our guest today, was working on an article about that very subject based on some failures that he has had at the Leadville Trail 100 and during Leadman itself. And so what I wanted to do over the course of this podcast is to add some color commentary to that particular article that he wrote, which is on his website. There'll be a link in the show notes to that, the title of which is The Freedom to Fail. We wanted to peel back the curtain a little bit and really dig into the details about some skills and some techniques that you can use to armor yourself for the season going forward, so that when you do happen to have these failure points, you can process them in a much more effective fashion, as well as, if you're struggling with this right now, something that you can do to reconcile those feelings right now so that you can move forward and begin the training process. I've always appreciated Neal's counsel and his commentary in this area. He has a wonderful way with words, as you guys are about to find out throughout the course of this podcast. All right, folks, with that out of the way, I am getting right out of the way. Here's my conversation with CTS coach Neal, all about failure and how to move forward from it.
A lot of athletes are looking at that right now. I mean, just like, oh God, the season sucked.
Well, let's get right into it then. You okay with that?
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
I personally go, yeah, whatever. On to the next.
Well, so I think like it was like your post, which I would have already kind of referred to in the intro, was really timely because honestly, I maybe had a dozen people reach out to me all through different venues, social media and through my website, and just friends of friends and friends of friends. And they were all asking the same kind of question. Yeah. I had a really bad season for whatever reason. I got injured. I didn't accomplish my goals. I DNF'd in my, goal races, all those kind of things. And how do I deal with it? Right? How do I manage this, what they were referring to, or how they were verbalizing as a failed season? And literally at the exact same time, within 6 hours of all of this transpiring, these dozen people kind of contacting me, you came out with this article. So obviously I take that as a little bit of a temperature check across the community, where a lot of people are, they're sizing up their season, and it's a realistic, outcome to not achieve your goals that you set out to accomplish, and to frame that as a failed year, right? Which is the kind of the vocabulary that the people were using that were kind of like contacting me. And so this all kind of came together. So I'm like, okay, I got to get Neal on the horn, because if this is my exposure to it, I guarantee you that the podcast community that listens to this podcast, there's probably 100 times more people that are experiencing the exact same thing. And then when you spider that network out even more, there's kind of more people. So it becomes pertinent right now. But I want to hear from your perspective first. What was like driving you to write that content? Because this is something that exists on your website. Obviously, you were stimulated to put the content together somehow. So take us through that before we get into it.
Well, I think, you had a weekend where you had these big lotteries go on, and then you had some lotteries open up. And so there's this sense of renewal. What's next? And that brings us to conclusion, kind of in my book, is okay, that, last year was last year. What's next? Let's keep going. let's keep driving this forward. And I think for a lot of people, you jump into those lotteries and like, or you couldn't get into those lotteries. I didn't get into the Western States lottery this year because I didn't have a finish. And
Yeah.
so it's okay, what's driving that? And so you have all this stuff coming up, and it's like, okay, what's next? And I think a lot of folks can get hooked on, I didn't finish. I didn't have the outcome that I wanted. And that drives it could drive your emotions for months for some people. I think, there's ways to address that almost immediately and even preventatively beforehand, as you look towards your season next year. So, but what drove it for me was, yeah, signing up for Lead Challenge again. you know, like, and just diving into it. It's like, yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give it a shot again for my sixth time, you
Right.
know, and just keep going, and we'll see what I learned from last year, you know.
What is it about? I'm going to kind of keep using the word failure, but if you want to reframe it
Yeah,
into your vocabulary, please do. But what is it about failure that is so powerful? I mean, you just mentioned something that was really poignant. Is that a lot of times this mentality or this framework can kind of last for months, right? You go through an
yeah.
entire year, and then you get to the end of it, and then all of a sudden February is rolling around, and you're still thinking about the missed opportunities or whatever you quote unquote failed at for that period of time. And the opposite is sometimes, but not always true, right? Where you get to the finish line and you get your shiny big belt buckle, and then next week you got to go back to work and you're a you're a normal person again.
Yeah.
So, I mean, what is it about it what is it about failing at a task that kind of makes it so powerful and so pervasive over like long periods of time to where we kind of dwell on it more?
Well, I think a lot of it is your relationship to failure, at the get-go. Failure, the experience of failure is a normal human experience. And if we looked, if we were to talk evolutionary, I don't want to offend anyone who doesn't believe in that, but if we look evolutionary, failure is designed for us to learn. Okay, it's like, hey, I don't want to get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger that's hanging outside of the cave, or whatever. You know, so we get that pit in our stomach, so it drives us to get better next time. But it also can lead us to this, uh, the sense, I, this sense of hopelessness and helplessness. Um, the other aspect of that is how we believe other people view us. And if we live in this world where, hey, I have to have these accomplishments, I have to have these belt buckles, I have to have this pickaxe from Leadman, and I have to show all my clients on social media, look what, Neal did. He's an accomplished coach and he's an accomplished therapist and mental performance coach. If I'm living like that, I'm not going to get anywhere. It's just going to keep driving me crazy. And so, but we also, I mean, that evolutionarily, we want to fit in. And that's one of the drivers there. But if we can step out of that and go, okay, what did I learn? How can I grow from this experience? Yeah, okay, it sucks. Excuse my language. It sucks. I mean, I got to Twin Lakes, and like, oh, Koop's there, all the coaches are there, my wife's there, all my crew's there. I'm like, here we go again, and it's like, but at the same time, I was like, you know what? There's always next year or the following year or whenever, and I can keep trying at this. Um, So yeah, I think, we get hooked on it as part of our identity, part of our self-worth. And if we're making that outcome part of that, of who we are, and for some of us, it's strong part of our identities hey, I need to, I'm a professional athlete, and I think it's really important to, keep striving. But if you let it knock you down like that, it's going to be hard to get back up.
You
So,
mentioned that one of
yeah,
the reasons it's so powerful, kind of two pieces. One, the evolutionary piece, which I don't want to fixate on too much, but the
yeah,
second piece is this comparison piece that kind of
right.
amplifies the failure.
Oh,
Because
totally.
if you're just looking at it in isolation, it's one thing. But if you're looking at it and comparing it to the opposite side of the spectrum, which is a big win, which is what a lot of people do, right? Especially at the elite, at the elite level. Like
Yeah.
I was 11th at Western States. I didn't get, my automatic 10, and then the first place was here, and then that gap in comparison is actually kind of quite big. Or you DNF and you look at the people that finished, those are two very polarizing opposite ends of the spectrum.
Right.
When athletes recognize that, like, hey, I'm comparing myself to this, that's not a fair comparison. What's the pathway out of that to just to kind of learn from it or to diffuse this pervasive sense of failure?
I like how you use the word diffuse. I love, first of all, A is that self-knowledge, self-awareness is so key, and noticing when you are not just hooked on the comparisons, but the language that's associated with it. I should, I must. These imperatives that you create, these rules that you create in those are pushing you around, and if you're able to notice, hey, look how my mind is pushing me around here. I'm going to start diffusing from that a little bit. All right, what's going to be more helpful? Well, let's go back to our values. Maybe my values are working hard, you know, courage, adventure. Let's go back to that and helping to identify who we are in that aspect. But you've got to diffuse from it first. You've got to have that self-awareness and put a name to it, what's going on there. I'm getting hooked on these comparisons, or more, in depth is the rules that you're creating around those comparisons. I must, I need, yeah, if you have a bad day at Western States and yeah, you're a sponsored athlete, there's that, that challenge there. But at the same time, if you take a step back, also, hey, this is what's going on. Let's go back to this and start, what did I learn from this? What did I gain from this? You're starting to separate from those rules a little bit,
Yeah.
you know, identify them, notice them, hey, that's what's going on.
Yeah. We kind of jumped into the middle a little bit and
Okay,
started
sorry.
about, no, it's totally fine. Like once again, these things have such little framework that I put into them every once in a while. But I want you to put your sports psychologist and therapist hat on a little bit, right? Because you serve all these different roles: coach, therapist, sports psych, mental coach, however you want to describe
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah.
And I want to use a little bit of the latter kind of throughout this next question, but also combined with your athletic background. So if you had an athlete that came to you and said, I just had a failure this season, I'm having a hard time getting over it, which is the position that a lot of these athletes that were contacting me are in right now. How would you, like just you working in, putting on your practitioner hat, how would you initially start working with them to diagnose what's going on and then help them move forward?
There's a lot of pieces of that, but I want to know what that means to them, what that failure means to them. Where is it hitting them? How is that hitting them? Um, how is that, impacting them on a day-to-day basis? Are you not getting up in the morning now? Um, so I'm looking at it. So I've got a couple different hats on. I'm putting on here, and this is my problem is that I've got three different lenses that I start looking at things through. Um, but as far as even a coach is like, what does this mean to you? What does the failure mean to you? Um, let's go back. What was the goal? What were the outcomes that you were seeking? And what were the other goals that you were working with there? What were the standards that you were holding yourself to that day? What were your process goals? So we're breaking this down a little bit to go, wait a second. Okay. All right. Let's see if we can, and I'm gonna, you're jumping around in your itinerary for a little bit, but how do we reframe this? How do we look at this a little differently and start putting on that growth mindset hat? How can we look at this not as this is fixed, that I'm a failure. I didn't have so let's go back to my experience. I didn't have success at Leadville. That doesn't mean I'm a failure at this race. What it means is I didn't have success on whatever August 20th, and then on the cycling portion I didn't have success that day. Okay, but what are the pieces of that? Why didn't I have success? Well, there may have been some training errors. It was really hot that day. There's all these other little pieces that I could learn from. Okay, now I get that. What's the next step? Is taking that challenge to the next level. Take this as a challenge instead of a threat. Take this as a learning experience instead of this is fixed. This is who I am. I'm a failure. This is so we're kind of moving away from that. Does that make sense? Okay.
It's so the phrase that I'm reminded of is win or learn. And I really like that, right? You either win
Yeah.
or whatever your version of win is, right? You don't have
Yeah.
to like, win the race outright or whatever.
Yeah.
Whatever your version of win is, you're either doing that or you're learning, right? One of those two, because you
One
can,
of the two.
and sometimes it's both. Sometimes you can win and learn. Absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. But if for whatever reason you fail at a race, you don't accomplish your goals, you DNF, kind of whatever negative piece of a framework we want to use, the my approach on that is what can we learn about this to get better the next time, and then put that into place,
Right.
because there's always something. There's absolutely a reason or reasons, more often than not, in fact almost always,
Oh,
reasons
reasons for sure.
reasons plural, of this underperformance, this failure, this DNF, kind of whatever it is, that you can take away, and you're in control of it. Like you can actually fix those going forward. Very, very, very few of those are not amendable by the individual,
Right.
right?
Right.
Somebody vandalizes the course and you get off course. Sure, you can't prevent that, but you can
Totally.
prevent how you react to it. So there's certain
Exactly.
yeah, so
Exactly.
there's certain parts where you can learn from, and certain parts where you just got to chalk it up to just the cosmos, going against you or whatever. And I've actually had that
I,
with athletes before.
I remember an athlete at a Leadville who was a front runner, and he got turned around, and that was the end of his day. And why not just get back on course? That's what it's all about. I didn't get my gels at Twin Lakes, outbound. And it's like, you know, and okay, I'm going to adapt here. I'm going to use the dried up rice cake I've got in my pocket and a piece of potato and a little bit of water. And, it was a sufferfest going up that hill. you know, and I was like, could I have gone back? Yeah. Did I have where my errors? I got some, little errors add up, and I accept that. And it's how you're accepting of that. The other piece that I want to bring out about failure is looking at how we think other people view us. And I could have in the back of my mind, oh my God, the head coach Koop is down here. All these coaches are looking at me horribly. I just suck at this. Oh, he's a bad coach. He can't even finish this race. I could look at it like that, or yeah, Neal, you just had a bad day. Koop was at the bottom, at Twin Lakes. I saw him there, and do you think any different of me because I didn't finish?
No,
That
not one single bit.
not one
But
single bit. Exactly.
but I will say, in like all honesty, there's a little bit from a coaching perspective, because I've been at races where athletes do great, athletes do really poorly, and everything in between, right?
Right.
All across the spectrum. I'm disappointed as well. And I'm disappointed in me. There's something that I should have done
Oh, totally.
in advance of this to prevent whatever kind of happened. So I'm always, people who work with me, both in a professional capacity and also in a coach athlete capacity, will recognize that I'm a pretty straight shooter. I'm very compassionate, but I'm also a very, very straight shooter. I don't sugarcoat a lot of things. And I do believe just in kind of like real time when those things happen, that's that slider that I have to use as a coach has to go more
Yeah.
towards the compassion side initially, and then towards the straight shooter side once, the 24 hours of
Straight
fog
shooter
kind
analytical
of wears off.
side, we're going to dig into this
Yeah.
and look at, what I could have done differently. I mean, I look at that as athletes all the time, as what could I do differently? And now let's figure out, oh, well, let's look back at this training here. You had this huge block and you had all these life stressors, all this other stuff going on. You missed it, a lot of, weeks, what's going on?
Yeah.
Okay, how do we develop from there?
Yeah. I want to give athletes kind of like a personal story of how coaches should and how I actually have viewed this and actually turned it into an advantage. So in February of this year, I had a kind of a relatively new athlete that a lot of people will recognize because he's had a lot of success to do Transgarden Canarium. His name is Jiaxing Shen from China, and he and I started working together in maybe October or November of last year. And the first race that he had on the docket was Transgarden Canaria, which is in February. And as a little bit more of a background to it, he does not speak any English, and he always has his wife translate for him whenever we get on calls. We get on calls every week, just like with the rest of my athletes, and that language barrier is it's a very real point of consideration. And so I decided to fly out to Transgran Canaria just to meet him and his wife and sit down and start to create more of a personal rapport. I had no other athletes in the race. And that's a big lift, right? That's a week out of pocket for me. I absorb all of that
Yeah,
expense and I'm more than happy to do that. I think that's kind of my charge as a coach with working with elite athletes is to try to do anything I can to help catalyze their performance. Well, anyway, long story short, he ends up dropping out of that race. And which is an even bigger deal culturally for a Chinese athlete because they take so much pride
hmm
in their performance. And so now you have this constellation of a lot of different things. You have a new coach athlete relationship. You have a coach who literally is going to the ends of the earth to go and just meet this athlete and see them at the race. Like I said, it's my only athlete there. I have no other business being there other than to meet
Yeah,
the person. You have this cultural element of there's simultaneously a language barrier combined with this kind of enhanced view of we should do whatever we can to, perform at our best. And it kind of ultimately results in failure. And I remember when the whole thing transpired and he decided to drop out and his wife was communicating to me what was going on. And the first thing that I wanted to do is to let him know that I still have all of the faith that I had in him as an athlete 24 hours previous to that. None of
yeah,
it had absolutely changed. And I wanted to over communicate that from the onset in
yep,
order to kind of accomplish this overall goal that I had by going out there of kind of improving our our coach athlete rapport
yeah,
because of all of these hurdles. And it ended up being a kind of a little bit of a blessing in disguise
for
because,
sure.
now he had somebody who had seen him in the dumps, right? Who had seen him. I think he's only dropped out of one other race, and he's a really prolific racer. If you guys go and look at his UTMB index, you will see races at like everywhere. They race a lot in China, and I'm pretty sure that that was only his second DNF. Um, so anyway, so now you've got this situation which could have been a negative, right? All of this effort and things like that, athlete kind of like drops out, that I deliberately turned into a positive by saying, listen, I got your back. Nothing has changed in the last 24 hours. In
Love
fact,
it.
to
Love it.
we're going to learn how to make this better. And the outcome of that was a really positive one, right? For the rest of the season, he was going gangbusters. He was fourth at Western States. He was second at CCC. Had a great kind of like latter half of the year. And our coach athlete relationship, even in spite of all of the communication barriers and things like that, is very, very good. And one of the
Yeah.
catalysts for that was this storyline of he goes to a race, he fails. I was kind of like there for him to kind of like pick him up and say, listen, nothing's different, man. We're gonna
Right.
still figure this whole thing out.
So powerful. It's so powerful. I mean, just that rapport that you have, that relationship that you have just totally enabled that, you think the difference between transactional relationships and transformational relationships, and that's transformational there. It's like, hey, that's okay. I got your back. Let's focus on, figure out what's up and work on what's next.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway, I mean, I wanted to tell that story for a lot of the athletes that are out there that have coaches that are afraid of part of, or that are they're amplifying this failure component when they are working with a coach because they think that they've let their coach down. And my message to them is if you have a relational coach as opposed to a transactional coach, it's actually
Yeah,
quite the opposite. We will utilize this to catalyze everything being better. The coach athlete
totally.
relationship, the
That,
athletic component of it, like the whole 9 yards. So yeah, we're disappointed, and our heart melts as well, and our pride melts as well because we
yeah,
want to see athletes succeed. That absolutely hurts. But we if we have a skilled coach behind the wheel, so to speak, they're normally able to take those and turn them into more positive outcomes than they would have been otherwise.
absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, that transformation is it's just so the transformational coach is so powerful. Yeah.
So we spent a little bit of time talking about, okay, people are in this position in the first place
Yeah.
because they've gone through some point of failure and because of some aspect of their psyche, the failure is kind of like on amplification, right? They're taking 3 months to get over things when it should take, a few hours or a few days or something like that. And it's weighing on them kind of like on put it. You put together almost like a bullet point toolkit for something that athletes can do almost to either stay out of it, or I'm going to use the word diffuse again, diffuse it almost from the onset, which I think is even more powerful, right? If you have
Right.
mindset going into it, then you're able to take things kind of with the right context. I'm going to leave a link in the show notes to this article that's on your website because I think it's really
Thanks.
Neal. But why don't you take the listeners through this so that they can start working on it now, right? So that whenever this happens again, and it's inevitable, you just went through your whole storyline. Everybody's been an athlete for long enough has had their share of failures.
Yeah.
So we're going to deal with it at some point or another. But why don't you take the listeners through this toolkit, so to speak, so that they can kind of armor themselves a little bit?
Sure. Sure. So, I mean, I start out by, saying, I mean, at the get-go, right now, start cultivating this growth mindset. This idea that, things aren't fixed necessarily. This is, I could grow here. Even though I am 55 years old, I'm going to be 56 next year, I could still keep growing. Now, I might not have a great 5K time. I might not get 15 minutes in the 5K, but I could still get better where I am right now. So I could still continuously get better. I can continuously learn. Okay. The other piece of this, and these are all things start now. Don't wait till after race day. This, and we talked about this when we talked about my mental skills course. It's like, you got to do this stuff now. Start building a toolkit of self-compassion.
That's my whole thing with training. Start now.
Start
You just
now.
happen, your races
I,
are like start now.
I,
Don't start
I,
after Christmas. Don't start after New Year's. Start now.
I will continue. I'll work with athletes on the mental performance perspective. You're coming to me a week or two before your race, but I'm going to tell you right now, I could give you some tools and we might get so far, but your best bet is starting right now after the race, not waiting until a week or two or a month before. Let's start working right now. And so this is why I'm actually starting that course again in January,
Oh, cool.
and opening it up for endurance athletes. But okay, so then for all endurance athletes, not just ultra runners, because I think everyone can benefit from it. Anyways, um, self-compassion. Next piece of this. So there's a couple pieces of self-compassion. As one is bringing that kindness to yourself. And I know there's athletes squirming right now. Are you squirming? Self-compassion. What do you mean? You got to have that kindness, because if what's gonna win? The carrot or the stick? In training a donkey, what's gonna win? The carrot or the stick? Ultimately, the carrot is gonna motivate more. If you're continuously beating yourself up, I really suck at this. I'm no good at this. That's not going to help you. But if you bring in the self-kindness, you're going to be able to get back and say, hey, you know what? I fell. What are you going to do? A little kid falls, trips in front of you, a little, toddler. Are you going to, you don't know how to walk, no, help them up. Hey, it's okay. Just brush it off. Let's bring that kindness in. The other pieces of self-compassion, mindfulness, being present. Hey, I'm right here, right now. You're not over there, not in the past, not in the future, but I'm right here, right now. The third piece is the common humanity in self-compassion. Is like, you know what? 40% of the people at Leadville this year did not, oh no, was it
No,
40%?
that
For
doesn't happen.
60%,
Yeah.
60%
Yeah.
did not finish. And, I look at Lead Challenge, there was only one guy my age and over that finished.
Oh,
Okay, at the entire Lead Challenge. Okay, there's this commonality. There's other guys who started, a lot of folks started, but they didn't necessarily finish. Okay, there's this common humanity there. That's where that self-compassion comes in. Um, then I say diffusion from the stories. Oh, go
or
ahead.
hey,
Yeah.
before we get into the diffusion for the stories, I want to stay on the self-compassion piece for a little bit
Yeah. Yeah.
because I want to make a distinction between being compassionate either to somebody that you're advising, that you're
Yeah.
helping out, to yourself, right? That type of compassion versus I'm going to use this is the term that one of my former colleagues who's really influential on my career. I can give him credit from JT Kearney, being dissociatively enthusiastic. So being enthusiastic despite the situation
Yes.
around yourself, and once again, I'm kind of known for being like brutally honest. So some people might actually think that
Yeah.
that is the part of it. I want you to try to kind of create a distinction between being compassionate but not being so enthusiastic despite the situation that it comes off as unauthentic.
Well, there's that, I think we use now the term toxic positivity,
Yeah, I've
you
never understood
know,
that, but okay.
there's, well, where it's disingenuous, and are you really in touch with what's going on inside? It is okay. So part of that self-compassion is also understanding that this hurts. This, not finishing for a fifth time hurt, and it sucked. Now be compassionate with that emotion. That's okay to be, it's okay to feel that way. And it's okay to, feel, the weight of, the failure, but be compassionate with it. Don't beat yourself up on this. This is the next step is, okay, how do I get to that? Being kind to yourself, not beating yourself up over it. Now that toxic positivity is, it's not truthful. You're lying to yourself. You say it doesn't hurt, right? That it hurts.
So
And
I
no,
almost kind of view this through like the caveat of as opposed to saying like, oh, it's okay, or some sort of amplified version of you're awesome or whatever, to it's okay you feel like that, right? Because
yeah,
you're being specific within
exactly.
you're being specific with recognizing that actual emotion and not being kind of complacent and as opposed to or you're not being complacent and not analyzing it.
Exactly. So you're not taking that emotion. I mean, if you just, oh yeah, everything was great. That was
Everything's great.
awesome. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I'm taking that emotion and I am trying to shove it up, shove it away from myself. But you know what? It's like that beach ball, at the pool, you push it down, it's gonna pop back up. And that's, no matter how many times you say, I'm awesome, I'm awesome. Okay, there's some pieces that might be helpful, but let's be real. This hurts. Okay. Once you're open to the emotion and able to sit with it and be compassionate with it, that's okay to cry about it. It's okay to cry that you didn't finish. That's okay. Being open to it is part of that process of compassion and acceptance. And then, all right, Now, how do we go on to the next step? Let's look also at the common humanity. Let's come back to the present where we are right now, what I can control, and work with my coach to figure out, okay, what are the little things that I need to work on this next season and move forward.
That's perfect. I appreciate that distinction between those two because we see a lot of athletes and also a lot of coaches and practitioners out there that will immediately jump to the it's okay versus recognizing the emotion and putting that emotion into context and counseling around that and then moving forward.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's powerful when you're able to do that, and that gives you, I think that self-compassion piece gives you the power to move forward. It's like, yeah, you're human, right? It feels uncomfortable. It hurts when we don't finish something, and it's normal too. Like I said, evolutionarily, if we want to go there, it's like that's a normal process to feel that. Okay, but the next step is you got to learn how what I need to do differently.
100%. Okay. So the next piece is diffusion from the stories. You got into it a little bit before.
Yeah.
Why don't you go
So,
over this?
so, diffusing from these stories that we have of ourselves, do you have this story is that somehow you're telling yourself that you're a failure, or I always suck at lead man. Like Neal is just, or the story, here's the story I was telling myself. And it started right after COVID for whatever reason, is that you're getting older. Your VO2 max is going down. You're getting weaker. This is the story Neal's telling himself. It's like, wait a second. That's a story. And a lot of times, sometimes those stories, and I talked about this in a coaches meeting a couple of weeks ago, is that those stories come from, us growing up. My family, what are you doing when you don't run 100 miles when you're 55. And notice when these stories are coming up. Notice them, name them, acknowledge them, and we're going to start putting them over here. These are the stories. How are these stories that you may have grown up with are pushing you around? Maybe they're the story you're creating right now. Let's create this next story and how we're going to do this differently over the next 5 or 6 years of my life, or even, I'm looking at this guy in his 90s who just did, was a champion cyclocross. I'm like, yeah, that's it. How can I keep doing that? That's the story I want to create.
I want to pick on one part of that you just mentioned that I think is
Yeah,
really powerful. It's name them.
name them.
So not just kind of process it or whatever, but give it like the time I got beat up story, right? Or
Totally.
time that I fell off the swing story. I mean, you're by what are you trying to accomplish by giving it, or what is accomplished by giving the story a proper name, going through the exercise of saying this is the I failed my college biochemistry test story.
This is, this is,
That happened to me. That's why
or
I'm picking up.
this is the drill sergeant story. This is the drill sergeant coming up. This is I was a wimp story. I was the slowest runner. What happens is by naming it, by even writing it down, drawing a picture of it. You could draw a picture of it. You could put it in bubbly legend. And I'm not to make light of it. This is the thing that once you start bringing this stuff to awareness and it's right there, you're starting to diffuse from it. Sometimes it can have less power over you, but you got to be aware of that. If you're not aware of it, it's going to be in the background pushing you around a little bit. Once you start naming it and noticing it and giving it a name, it gives it a little bit less power. Does that make sense? You
A
got
little
that
bit. I mean,
curious eyes. Yeah.
yeah. Is it through like the compartmentalization of like almost like putting it in a box? Like I'm going to contain this story in this thing that I'm going to put a label on, and because of that whole construct, whenever it comes up, that put like mentally putting it in a box kind of disables, or we keep using the word
I
use
I
it,
would
diffuse is probably a better word, diffuses it from like creeping out into other
I
areas.
would I would use another metaphor for it because I
Yeah.
think I put it in a box and I'm trying to lock it
Yeah,
down.
yeah, yeah.
I want to diffuse from it. I want it to go off into the atmosphere because what's happening right now is I'm fused with the story.
Mm.
I am hooked on this story. And what I'm doing by bringing it to my awareness is I am, ideally going, yeah, there's that story again. And we could look at it at different angles. How is it pushing me around? You have to have this other piece too. It's like, you know what? That's the story. Here's where we're going to go and what we're going to create tomorrow and focusing on this is where I love talking about our values, our goals, our aspirations, what gives us meaning in life. You know what? That story's pushing me around. I'm going to go over here and focus on this. This is where being present and you're opening up to this. Yeah, that's you're and diffusing from it by naming it. If you're not aware of it, pushing you around, it's like I always giggle. I'm like running, it's like, ah, there's that story pushing me around again. It's
Well,
like, let's focus. Yeah,
everybody can identify with those two or three key things in their life that has happened to them in the past that come into our psyche when we're out there on these long runs and races. I mean, trust me, it has happened to everybody. Every time I do a really in-depth race debrief with an athlete, something like that comes up during this part of the race. I thought about this thing that happened 10 years ago. And
totally.
usually it's a conversation started to is that happened before? So no, every race or 80% of the races or something like that where it like constantly comes up. But I've never thought about the technique or the aspect of actually giving that story a name to help this diffusion process, which I think is kind of cool.
Yeah. Write it down. Write it down. The more you're aware of it pushing you around, the more you're starting to become present and you're getting a 30,000 foot view of it. It's like,
Yeah.
yeah, there it is. There it is moving around. Okay, it's pushing me around. I'm going to refocus. You're becoming more present and refocus on, hey, what are the things I can control right now? Well, I don't have to let this story push me around. I'm going to go back and get my gels at Twin Lakes and then go up this hill. It's like, yeah,
It always comes back to getting more gels.
you got to get more gel. More rice cakes, more gels,
Okay,
more tailwind.
let's move on to the let's move on to the last piece of this, which is certainly not the final piece, right? But the last piece in this article, which really resonated with me because this is a kind of a coaching goal that I have for 2024 and beyond, or there's elements of that kind of fuse with this coaching goal that I've had going forward, and that's be open to assistance and build a team.
Oh yeah. So it kind of goes back to that growth mindset. In the research with growth mindset, if it's the kid who is able to go to the math teacher and go, "Hey, can you help me with this problem?" I loved when I heard my daughter do this, and she did it so many times, and you become an advocate for yourself. And what happens, we've got this thing in our society, and I don't know if it's just here in the US, it might be international, it might be different parts of the world where I need to do this myself. I've got this broken leg, I'm going to fix it. And, I'm going to, it's that mental toughness stuff that that's going to push you around a little bit. If you start opening up to that assistance and getting a coach, I got better when I first got a coach marathoning. I was like, oh yeah, this can work here. I'm not now I'm like, now my coach is holding me back. I'm like, what do you mean 8 hours a week, man? But that's helping me. That's, going to your physical therapist, bringing a crew to your race of select people, finding those pacers that are going to work with you, and that you are able to communicate with well, but it's bringing your team with creating your team. If you're not able to do that and yeah, when you struggle, it's going to be a little bit harder. But if you open up to that team, it was so powerful to see, when I got into Twin Lakes and see the group of coaches there. It was, there's the team. They were just boom, boom, boom. and so helpful and such a loving group of people, to experience that. And I'm not just trying to sell our coaches, but I'm just saying that that was a team. The my group of people that were with me, that was a team, and but you got to create that to help develop that growth mindset, to help to help grow. You know, uh,
The intentional catalyst piece is, I think, something that everybody
oh,
can
that's a good,
and can take home, meaning, you're not just bringing on a pacer at the last minute to like help drag you, up power line at the towards the end of the race, or drag you around Turquoise Lake at the end of the race. You're bringing them in an intimate way, kind of into the entirety of the process, right? Because you're letting them know, hey, this is how I train. This is where I was really good in training. This is where I was really bad. Here's where I need help from you, and here's how you can pick me up if I'm down and help catalyze this part of the performance, or whatever. That requires a lot of humility, right? To say, I need help, I'm doing everything I can in this area, and I still need help from you all, whoever you all is. And we started mentioning the professionals, but it can also be friends, family, training partners, and things like that. The humility of a little of kind of like letting part of that go can
yeah.
also be kind of liberating for athletes as well, because then they know that other people kind of have their back.
Yeah, it's yeah, would you do that for somebody else? Of course you would. And this is the self-compassion piece. It's part of that is being, it's this growth mindset piece. It is also bringing this compassion in. It's like, yeah, I'm going to take care of myself by having this team, and I look, yeah, and communicating with the team. I mean, I look at my Leadville experience and I go, okay, ah, and I even got the feedback. You didn't really communicate with us. And I just kind of came in with this assumptions. Oh, I got this, I know what I'm doing, and there was this reality. It's like, no, I needed to really direct people, like who is going to be in the crew tent, these are the gels that I need, this is what we need to happen, and you're in charge. you
Yeah.
know,
I mean, if I step back a little bit, this is kind of moving from an athletic framework to more of a professional framework, and
yeah,
specifically my professional framework. This is what I mentioned earlier. This is one of the things that I'm doing new in 2024 is I'm building a better team around each athlete, essentially, and
oh,
helping all of those different people kind of coordinate themselves as as a team. And it's because that's so powerful. I mean, at the end of the day, I'm a coach. My job is to get my athletes better, have them get the finish line, accomplish their goals, and things like that. And one of the things that I'm realizing is that building this team around the athletes who are all better individual professionals than I am. I want
yes,
that clear from the get go. People like you, Neal, people like our mutual colleague Justin Ross, who's part of this group. They all do elements of their specific, whatever they're offering as counsel better than I can. They're better mental coaches than I am. They can analyze blood work better than I can. They can
yeah,
do strength training prescription better than I can. And I'm humble enough to recognize that and say in certain cases, hey, listen, athlete X, I want this strength training coach to take over your strength training programming. I'm going to get the heck out of the way and act as a coordinator between this person and me in order to make sure that the strength training is coordinated with the run training.
yeah, yeah,
And there's a lot of power in that, because all of those individual members of the team are essentially going to be better than the sum of their parts in helping this athlete do whatever that they want to do.
totally, totally. And looking at it as a therapist and a mental performance coach, if I get releases to talk to like a physical therapist or a doctor to
Yeah.
go, hey, if we have this team, we're going to be helping this athlete a lot more than just me trying to do this alone. That's going to move that athlete forward.
Oh, 100%. You know what?
Yeah,
Like, I'll just give a really simple example. I know you do this, but I actually have this experience where, another mental skills coach, sports psychologist, Justin Ross, works a couple with my athletes. He'll program not all of, but a lot of their stuff in Training Peaks. So specifically, so I can see it, and it also gives him framework. When I see it in Training Peaks and I'm prescribing workouts, and then I have a conversation with that athlete, I can then reinforce what Justin wanted that athlete to do.
totally.
It is so immensely powerful. it's almost hard to describe how impactful that reinforcement can actually be. And
It's
then you
huge.
yeah, and
It's
then you
huge.
multiply that across different people, right? A physical therapist that talks to a coach, or a strength training person that talks to a mental skills coach, or whatever. There's all these different spider webs that actually happen. It's not easy to coordinate. The more cooks you have in the kitchen, the harder it is to, make the meal, so to speak.
Totally.
But when you do it right, it's extreme. It's just extremely impactful, and it's so hard to put into words why it actually is impactful. But we've seen it work like time and time
Oh,
again.
we see it work in healthcare
Yeah.
when everyone's working as a team, and there's different ways to do that. But I come from that social work background where it's we got to do this. We got to bring A, B, C, and D in here to do that. I love that Justin's doing that too, and I've actually started sketching out ways to figure out how to do that myself. So
It's weird because it's not like that wasn't the intent of the delivery system, right?
right,
Like practitioners have kind of co-opted it into the delivery system, because Training Peaks being the delivery system,
yeah,
because it's the one that the athletes kind of interface with. And I'm not sold that that's the ultimate end all be all best solution. I'm just using that as an example
yep,
of when there is some at least very cursory coordination. And here the coordination is let's be honest, it's very limited. It's me reading kind of the prescription or the feedback that
you're
just
working on
ah,
self-talk now.
yeah, yeah,
You're
yeah.
working on motivation now. Yep,
Exactly. That's exactly what it is. And that's not the same as the three of us getting on the phone and going through the entirety of the plan. But even when it's that simple, you're working on self-talk, you're working on this, you're working on that, it still becomes really like remarkably powerful.
Summarizing it, and sometimes it's as healthcare providers, that's all we have time for. But if we, but if you summarize it, you're communicating this information. It's like, now Koop knows, okay, this is what we're working on. I'm going to reinforce that, and that is immensely powerful. If I learn from a PT, or the PT learns from me, that hey, we're going to be working on this aspect, this is where we're going with that. And or I know, now I know the prognosis here. The prognosis isn't as bad. That gives me more information.
I'm gonna do a whole podcast once I flush this thing out with the people, like kind of a selection of the people that I'm putting in this team, to go to like peel the curtain back on this is how we do it. This is
Yeah,
where it works really well. This is where we kind of struggled, things like
that's
that.
awesome.
Just like with everything else I've done, I'm just gonna peel the curtain back. Here's the model that we're using. I think it's going to be awesome. But if it's, once again, we didn't coordinate on this in advance. If it's
Yeah,
right in line with this, even if you don't have all of those resources available to you, right? You don't have to be a high level athlete to bring in a team of friends, family members, things like that have impacted you, training partners, and things like that
totally.
can actually be extremely impactful.
Huge. Absolutely. Absolutely. No, I love, yeah, I could go on about that.
Okay. So we've gone through it, and like I said, I'm gonna link up the article in the show notes. But to wrap things up, Neal, I kind of want to like lean on your personal experience a little bit. What are you gonna do next year? You've kind of gone through this process. You're an experienced endurance athlete. Like, where are you sitting with all of this?
Let's see, what am I going to do next year?
Putting you on the
Is
spot
is
with
is
this,
my
but
is my
I don't know.
wife listening?
I don't know. If she's doing something.
So I am signed up for Lead Challenge this year, and we are approaching it a little bit differently, and we're tackling a little bit more. As we know, as we age, we do need a little bit more VO2 max work, and we're tackling that a little bit more power early on. I'm already noticing significant improvements from where I was a couple months ago, which is pretty cool. Um,
So there's
Working
the
on
training adjustment. That's one part of it,
there's
right?
one
They're
part of
taking
it.
feedback, and you're like, okay, this is the training adjustment.
This is the training adjustment. And then I look seriously at my crew. I love the people that I worked with, but I'm like, okay, here's the learning experience. You got to communicate. And I have a buddy, hopefully, if he gets into Leadville, it's a different story, but he's trying to get into the lottery. But if he doesn't, then he's going to be crewing me, and he's an extremely experienced athlete, and he's the one who got me into this initially. And she's like, you never asked me. I said, well, I'm sorry. You were always doing something, but he's going to be working with me. My wife is also has asked to work with me again. If she's not busy, our daughter runs cross country. That might be a weekend for cross country. So, but I know he's there, and I know I've got to communicate with that crew. Also, again, going back to the training, there's a strength training component that, yep, I gotta hit this. This is serious. This is not something I got to put aside. And I think, maybe working on my own mental skills. I teach it, and I practice it, but I got to practice a little bit more here. And the other advantage I have is I've had changes in my work situation, so I have a different free time, and then I could actually go and get to the trails a bit more, and actually get on the technical sections on the mountain bike and work a little bit more. Maybe take that Friday off and go and train up in Leadville. So there's these other components that are like, oh yeah, and this also acknowledging, this is the compassion side, is I also acknowledge is that last year I got a lot going on. I'm a therapist, a mental performance coach, a coach for CTS, and then I have a family, and I'm doing my own training for Lead Challenge, which requires a lot of time. Where do you find the hours in the day to do that? As I look back, I'm like, how did I do that?
But
So,
dude, you're a
yeah.
reflection of the athletes that you work with, man. Like all that, like not all, but the vast majority of the athletes that you work with, that's the blueprint.
That's the blueprint. And that gives me a lot of, able to go, okay, how do we structure this differently for you? How do I, okay, let's have the compassion. If you're not able to get that workout on, how do we, and I'm educating my athletes, how do we adapt this workout, that we're doing? So you come into this and go, okay, I don't have time for this hour and a half, but how could I adapt this a little differently? And, without, 1,000 texts or emails, which I may not be able to respond to in that moment. And so how do we adapt and how do we grow? And that for me is a superpower too, for me as a coach and as me as an athlete is like, okay, I'm getting to this workout. What is the purpose of this workout? Why am I doing this? Okay, how could I get this and maybe kind of shorten this up or move things around here, if I need to do that. And I like that it's proving powerful. People are like, oh, you mean I don't have to do 4 hours today, on top of mowing the lawn and taking care of it's like, yeah, well, I'll be able to move it to Sunday.
You get it. Get it.
Let's look at it.
It sounds like you're fighting like the personal battle, right? The personal battle of you finishing Lead Challenge on all fronts, right? You've got the training
Totally.
side. You recognize there's some training things that you're doing, both from a
Yep.
structural standpoint, but also your
Yep.
life is freeing up. You are working on your own mental skills. I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Is it the same in the mental skills and the therapy world where the people that are the practitioners are the worst at taking their own advice? Because that's the same in coaching, where our coaches, we're the worst at taking our own advice. Is it the same in that world?
I am getting better at it.
Okay, good.
I mean, it is. I mean, you have a lot of people coming into both these fields, mental performance or psychotherapy, because they had run into their own stuff. And yeah, you probably have 1,000 people talking about mindfulness and have never practiced or don't practice mindfulness like they talk about it, and it's like, oh, you got to practice these skills.
Some of the coaches are the worst. Yeah, it's another story. Okay. So, and then that's the second front, mental
Yeah.
skills. And the third piece was crew, right? You're
True.
reinforcing the people that you're bringing onto the actual crew that's
Absolutely.
not only supporting you during the race, but also supporting you day to day, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Yeah. And, I mean, you look at it too, also the coaching perspective and, who may be periphery from that crew is we've been working together for a year now. And it's like, oh, now he really kind of gets an idea where I'm at. And this is what I'm finding out as a coach, having worked with athletes for almost 2 years. It's like now that we've been working together, we've got this rapport and we got this relationship. We kind of know where we're going, and that is so powerful, when you start working with someone for over, 3 months. It's like where, hey, we got coaching for this race. It's more than that. If you can work with someone for over a year, that's where you get a lot out of that.
I think that that's
Uh,
a really big thing in both coaching and crewing athletes for races is the consistency.
Yeah.
And that only it takes 12 months to really to really drill that in. In fact, I mean you've heard me tell this to our younger coaches all the time, is you kind of earn your keep after year two, three, and four, not year one. Year one, you can kind of do anything as long as you don't screw it up, and you're
Yeah.
gonna usually gonna get an athlete better. But it's looking at year one, what worked and what didn't work. This is why training history is so important. And building off of that for years two, three, and four, that's the real skill. That's where
Yeah.
real skill kind of comes into play. And a similar thing is true with the crewing side of things, where if you know so and so is going to be there and they're going to be able to figure it out. Doesn't matter what's going on. Just because they know you, that's a really powerful that's a really powerful ergogenic aid, as I
Yes.
described it in our recent coaching conference. It's a really powerful ergogenic aid that athletes can actually put out on the race course, is having the right people in their crew so that they can just essentially trust them to not only execute the plan that they've made, but also deviate from the plan whenever it's necessary.
Totally. Totally. Yeah. I mean, it's all of it comes together. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking about, I think about Leadville a lot, but I think about what happens, at that Winfield side where you don't have a crew, where you don't have a pacer anymore. And that is like, how do you got to be able to mentally prepare for your 50 miles in, I got 50 miles to go. How you've got to have that. Okay, if I don't have crew here, I don't have that. Okay, let's work on our minds to prepare for that moment so you can rally.
I think that's one of, I mean, just speaking to Leadville specifically, and not to get too ingrained within Leadville, but there are learning lessons for this outside of that race.
Yeah.
When they changed the Winfield aid station to just being a aid station versus one that crews can come out and one that pacers can come out to, and for the listeners out there that aren't familiar with the Leadville Trail 100, it's an out and back course. The three aid stations that are in question are Twin Lakes outbound, which is about mile 40, the Winfield turnaround aid station, which is mile 50, and then you come back to the Twin Lakes aid station again, which is about mile 60. I can't remember the exact mileages off the top of my head.
63.2.
But my point with that is at one point you could get crew and a pacer at Winfield, typical for most ultra marathons. Halfway point, you pick up your crew or you pick up your pacer, and then you come back over Hope Pass. But when they changed it to Twin Lakes, which they did for very good reasons, I'm not dismissing the reasons that they needed to actually change that aid station. It dramatically altered the kind of the conditions of the race, because now you have literally the hardest section of the race, which is about 20 miles, the longest section of the race, paired with the section where you're not going to see your crew again. So you go up and over Hope Pass, which is the biggest climb. You turn around and then you go up and over Hope Pass again, which is the biggest climb again. And you come back and see your crew. And it's a big period of time
It's
that you
huge.
don't see. And granted, there's a lot of people out on the course, but you don't see the people that are actually there to support you. And I think that dramatically altered kind of the dynamics of the race, especially for the less experienced runners, which Leadville actually gets a lot of.
Lots.
That's a hard thing to manage, to be out there for 8 hours over a really big mountain pass in the middle of the race when you're already fatigued,
Yeah.
without a lot of without a lot of people to like help and comfort you. You have to be self-reliant, I guess is what I'm saying. Is way different than it was before.
Self-reliant, in not just that physical sense, but that mental sense of being able to, okay, these, what's pushing me around right now? Let's focus on the things that I can control, which is, my attitude. I could use my self-talk strategies. I could work in becoming more present with where I'm at right now. Blech,
The rocks and the altitude and the terrain are pushing you around, like literally.
The rocks, altitude, everything, because that impacts your psychological state, your mental state. Is the altitude, lack of oxygen to your brain. That's gonna, lack of food. nausea, you're getting back to those survival skills. But if you're able to manage that and the mental skills, the mental piece of that, that's where that's going to help you tremendously.
100%. All right, Neal, we're going to let you go, man. This is
All
fast.
right.
I'm going to leave links in the show notes to the article and also to your website. But is there anything else you want to leave the listeners with, like any kind of like last nuggets of wisdom as they're navigating
I say
this
it all
time
the
frame right
time.
now?
Start now, practicing this stuff. Start now. Give yourself the compassion. If you just finish a race, it's okay to grieve it. It's okay to grieve it. Give yourself the 24 hours, 36. I'm not going to give you a timeline, but grieve it. You know, put closure on it. Start refocusing on what you learned and putting that into action right now. Start working on your mental skills right now. I'll plug my course, which is starting January 24th, and we're going to just I've introduced 3 individual coaching sessions for athletes on top of the webinar. Not necessarily it's a webinar. It's dialogue. We're going to be working together as a team, and then I will work with people individually to kind of help prepare their mental skills for the race season.
That's awesome, man. I'll make sure we point people in that right direction, all in the show
Cool.
notes. Neal, once
Yes,
again,
sir.
coming on the podcast. I've always
Oh, no
appreciated
worries.
your counsel and your perspective on these
Oh,
things.
no worries. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. I had fun.
All right, folks, there you have it. There you go. Much thanks to Neal for coming on the podcast today. As I mentioned during the intro, he has a wonderful way with words and explaining things. And I hope that a lot of the messages that we went through during the course of this podcast about how to manage failure resonates with you, irrespective of if you have experienced this in the past or you're currently kind of managing it and figuring out how to go forward. Links will be in the show notes to Neal's work, as well as anything else that we mentioned in the podcast. If you think that Neal or any one of our other CTS coaches would be the right fit for you preparing for your goals in 2024, hit me up on social media. I would love to connect you with one of our coaches, or you can just go to our website, trainright.com, and fill out one of the coach consultation forms. That is actually one of the easiest ways to get started with one of our fantastic coaches. All right, folks, that is it for today. And as always, we will see you out on the trails.